Hey guys, thanks for watching the Thursday show. I'm Pastor Chelsea, and I'm so glad you're with us this week. Well, today I wanted to talk about comparison. You know, even right now as you're watching, you're probably on Facebook or YouTube, and social media, like never before, has created platforms, yes, for us to do good, but also for us to compare to one another. You know, it's something just about the nature of the world that we live in too. We're taught to compare our successes with others' successes, or compare our failures with other failures. Social media has become a platform for comparing our lives to each other. And we do that in two ways. We compare our winnings to others' winnings, or we compare to the failings that we have and that others have. So comparing to others' winnings would be saying things like, I wish I had their house that they just got to buy, or look at the dream vacation they just went on, or look at how good all the kids pose in their family photos, whereas mine are running around screaming. When we compare to others' winnings, we're comparing to the positive things that we see other people have. The crazy thing is, we are not the first ones to do this. Even if you go back and look in scripture, Jesus' disciples had the exact same problem. If you look in Luke 9:46, it says an argument started among the disciples as to which of them would be the greatest. And that's not even the only time they did that. Another passage, Luke 22, so sometime after that first passage, then the disciples began to argue amongst themselves who would be the greatest among them. There's something in us that just feels this need to compare to other people's winnings and successes. But we also compare to other people's failings. This would be saying things like, well, at least I don't struggle with that problem. Or at least I don't talk to my parents as bad as my friends do. Or at least I work harder than most people at my job. And wouldn't you know it, we're not the first ones to do that either. If we look in scripture, the Pharisees did the exact same thing in their day too. In Luke 18:9-14, it says, To some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. Tax collectors were looked down on in that society. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give 1/10 of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his chest and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that man, the tax collector, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Comparison happened all over the place in the Bible. The first murder happened because of comparison. Cain comparing his gift to Abel's gift. Jacob and Esau, 2 brothers, constantly comparing themselves to one another and competing for their father's attention. Rachel and Leah, 2 sisters who were competing for the affection of their husband, because back in that day that was okay, not condoning that now. Isaac and Ishmael, the Israelites and the Egyptians, the disciples with each other. Even Paul dealt with this too. Paul, in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, is writing to the church in Corinth, and he's talking about how people have compared his public speaking ability with the speaking ability of others. Some people like his style better, some people like others' style better, which is crazy to think that even in the New Testament church, comparison like that was still happening. But I love what Paul says in verse 17. If you want to boast, boast only about the Lord. When people commend themselves, it doesn't count for much. The important thing is for the Lord to commend them. Part of our problem when it comes to comparison is we have the wrong view of it. You see, we often think about comparison kinda like a set of stairs. You have these stairs that lead going up, and we position ourselves either ahead of some people or beneath other people. So we see the people who seem further along by the world's standards, and we're like, I want to measure up to them. I want to get there. I want to get to that paycheck. I want to get that house. But then we also compare to the people we see as beneath us, saying, well, at least I'm not having that problem. At least I'm out of debt. At least I've got this. When we do that, we are constantly fighting for position. over other people, trying to get ahead, trying to step on top of the people that we see as beneath us. But here's the problem with that. That's not how God sees us. In reality, the chart looks a lot more like this. There's no steps, there's no stairs to get ahead. There's one single flat line, and we all stand there. And we all stand there before Jesus. Jesus is the only one elevated above us. Jesus is the only one we should be looking ahead to. Because at the foot of the cross, the ground is level. Everyone struggles with comparison. All of us do. So how do we actually stop living in comparison with each other? Well, I have 3 simple steps for you. Number 1, get your eyes off yourself. Jesus said that whoever is least would be greatest in his kingdom. He promoted an upside down and backwards economy, which doesn't really make sense to our brains at first. But it shows that when we get our eyes off of ourselves, that's when he can work through us. See, if I'm always comparing myself to other people around me, I will forever live like I'm not enough. Imagine you have 2 basketball players, one who's 6'2" and one who's 5'7". Just because one is 6'2" and can dunk the basketball and the other is 5'7" and can't, doesn't necessarily mean that the taller guy is the better basketball player. In reality, maybe the shorter guy has better skills. But if our shorter basketball player is forever comparing himself to the 6'2" basketball player, he's never going to be able to live up to his potential to do what he can do. And that happens to us too. If I'm forever comparing myself to my brothers and sisters at church, then how am I ever supposed to be able to live fully in my potential of what God has created me uniquely to do? That leads to step 2. Get our eyes off ourselves and look to Jesus. This reminds me of a time I took a hip-hop dance class. Yes, as you can imagine, it was awesome. And I was doing it with a friend to just kind of have some fun, work out in a different way, and it was a pretty crowded room. So we stood in the back of the room and we were trying to watch the teacher, but there were so many people in there that we kind of just could see the students who were directly in front of us. So we were trying to copy the moves of the people who were directly ahead. The problem is, when the students in front of us would mess up, we would copy their mess ups. What we needed to be doing was looking ahead to the teacher who knew what they were doing, who were leading the class. That was the person that we should copy, because they knew how to do the dance. Well, we do the same thing in our faith. Often we're comparing our moves to the person who's just ahead of us, and they're making mistakes too. We need to instead put our eyes on Jesus, copy after him, follow after him, let him be the teacher, since he's the only one we should ever be comparing ourselves to. And lastly, step 3, we need to see others as community, not competition. That means recognizing that we're all on the same team. Everybody has mistakes. Everybody has felt like they're not enough. When we recognize that, it changes the way we view one another. It helps us to better rejoice in each other's winnings, celebrate and rejoice with those who rejoice. And it helps us to also support one another in their failings and grow with them along the way. I personally have struggled with this just as much as anybody. And you might think that as a pastor or on a church staff that, people would be above that. But let me tell you, comparison happens here in church too. I can recall especially a few years back when Pastor Dan and I were working together. Even though we are about as opposite as you possibly could get, we would still sometimes get in this trap of comparing ourselves to one another. Oh, well, they got that speaking opportunity. Oh, Pastor trusted them with this special job. And both of us would get caught up in comparison. Well, I remember a very wise sage, you know her as Pastor Ann, one day just gave some advice out of the blue, and it was exactly what I needed to hear. She offered a quote, which a lot of people have said it. Maybe Mark Twain might have been the first one, we're not completely sure. But the quote goes as this: "Comparison is the death of joy." Comparison is the death of joy. Whenever we start to compare ourselves to somebody else, it kills whatever joy we had. If I start to compare my home to somebody else's home, it kills any joy that I could have over the amazing place God has provided for me to live. If I compare my hair to that girl's hair, if I compare my job to that person's job, it's going to kill any joy that I have in that moment. Where has comparison been stealing your joy? So often we make these judgments about better or worse, when in reality we just need to embrace the beauty in different. If this message of comparison is resonating with you at all today, would you just write yes in the comments? Or maybe put a little raised hand emoji to let me know that you identify with this, you know how that feels. Because I'm pretty sure all of us have struggled with comparison. But if we can get our eyes off ourselves and put our eyes instead on Jesus and start to see each other as community rather than competition, that's going to start to reset the perspective we need when we look at one another. I hope that word encourages you this week. I hope it uplifts you and carries you and gives you a perspective that you haven't had before. And hey, as always, if you want to talk more about this or other subjects, feel free to reach out and send me an email, chelsea@cwmc.church. Until next week, I hope you have a great one.